Hey guys, today's episode is part of a new series called Everything You Need to Know About English Punctuation. Now, it's something that people often overlook, but punctuation is something that can not only help the reader clearly understand your message, but it can also change the entire meaning of a sentence. I kid you not, I once spent a whole hour debating with my colleague at a law firm about a full stop. Yeah. Take this sentence as an example. Let's eat children versus let's eat children. The first one means that you're calling children to have a meal. And the second one means that the children are the meal.
She's gonna eat me! Huh?
And so in this video, we'll be looking at the difference between the semicolon and the colon. Let's start by learning how to properly use the semicolon. Generally speaking, semicolons are used to join two independent clauses that can stand alone in a sentence. The key element here is that the sentences are able to stand alone and make logical and grammatical sense independently. In other words, standalone sentences. Their purpose is to therefore do one of the following two things. First, to join two independent clauses, or to separate items in a long and complex list. First, let's take a look at semicolons within the context of joining two independent clauses. If I write, "There was a hurricane yesterday. The football match was cancelled." Now, there's nothing intrinsically wrong with writing the two sentences with a full stop in the middle. But it does look and sound as if the hurricane and the football match are two unrelated things. So if you're trying to convey the fact that the football match was cancelled because of the hurricane, a semicolon would work much better. To make the sentences more connected and to show the relationship between the two sentences, we could say, "There was a hurricane yesterday. The football match was cancelled." The phrase now sounds less choppy and it flows way better than if we were to use a full stop. Note two things here. Capitalization is not needed after a semicolon, and using a comma instead of the semicolon or full stop would be grammatically incorrect. Turning to the first point, when you place a semicolon between the two sentences, they become one sentence, so no capital letter is actually needed. We do, of course, capitalize the second sentence if and when it begins with a proper noun like someone's name or a city or a country and so on. For example, I love living in a warm and sunny place. California has great weather. As for the second point, we cannot use commas to connect dependent clauses. So for instance, you can't say, "I went to the Nike store, everything was on sale, so I bought a lot of clothes." Here, "I went to the Nike store and everything was on sale, so I bought a lot of clothes" are standalone sentences. And since you're saying that you bought a lot of clothes at the Nike store because everything was on sale, you should use a semicolon to link them. With that in mind, you should instead say, "I went to the Nike store. Everything was on sale, so I bought a lot of clothes." The comma after the word sale is used correctly because it connects the dependent clause, "so I bought a lot of clothes." But how about using semicolons to separate items in a complex list? Well, imagine that we're going camping in the wild and I give you a list of items that you need to bring with you on the trip. But I don't want to give you a simple list like warm jacket, tent, trekking shoes, and water bottle. I also want to give you a short explanation about each item on the list. For instance, I could write, "Please bring the following items: tent, sleeping bag, and warm clothes for sleeping, and water bottle, electrolytes, and carb-rich snacks for the all-day trek." Here we're talking about a list of three separate groups. As another example, let's say that you're writing an email to a client and telling them where your offices are located. You could write, "We have offices in Paris, France, London, United Kingdom, Tokyo, Japan, and San Francisco, USA." So that's pretty much it for the semicolon. Now what about the colon? Remember that the colon has 3 distinct grammatical uses. The first is to introduce a list, like we did in the examples above, or a quotation. The second is to separate 2 independent clauses when the second explains the first. And lastly, emphasis. The first grammatical use is pretty easy. When we want to introduce a list of items, we can add a colon before we begin the list. For example, let's imagine that you're working at a law firm and you want to tell your client to provide you with a list of documents to prepare their case for trial. You could write something like, "We ask that you please provide us with the following documents in preparation for your trial: a purchase invoice, receipt, and vehicle registration certificate." And if you want to quote something that someone said, you could just say, "Simon said, I think it's going to rain tomorrow." As for the second grammatical use, a colon can be used to separate 2 independent clauses, but only when the second clause is directly related to the first, and the emphasis is on the second clause. And that's probably the main difference between the use of semicolons and colons, the emphasis on the second clause. For example, a friend of mine betrays me and does something bad behind my back. I can say to him, "I want you to remember one thing. I will never forget this." Here the emphasis is clearly on the second phrase, "I will never forget this." Yes, the sentence, "I want you to remember one thing" is important, but what I really want to stress is that I will never ever forget what my friend did to me. Compare this to me saying, "I need to take a break. I'm feeling tired." I'm not really trying to put emphasis on the second sentence. Instead, the 2 sentences are one complete thought. You can now clearly see how a lot of people use colons and semicolons interchangeably. In terms of the third and final grammatical use, colons are used to emphasize the word or phrase that follows it. For example, I can truly say that I'm overwhelmed with one emotion: disappointment. Now, you're probably wondering about whether or not we should be capitalizing the first word of the second clause. The rules here are ever so slightly different to those related to semicolons. Yes, you absolutely have to capitalize the first word in the second sentence if it's a proper noun, like a name, but equally, if you're quoting someone, then you must also capitalize the word. For example, as Winston Churchill said, "We will never surrender." Here we capitalize the word "we." Importantly, however, we do not use colons to interrupt a complete sentence. Let's say that you're listing ingredients for a recipe and say, "The ingredients for beef bulgogi include soy sauce, ribeye steak, spring onions, sugar, garlic, ginger, and toasted sesame seeds." You cannot add a colon after the word "include" because it will disrupt the sentence. If we were to add the words "the following," then yes, you could add a colon. So you'd say, "The ingredients for beef bulgogi include the following: soy sauce, ribeye steak, spring onions, sugar, garlic, ginger, and toasted sesame seeds." The same goes for the sentence, "I've lived in the UK, USA, and France." Or my 3 favorite colors are orange, blue, and red. Again, if we were to add the following or are as follows, we can then use the colon to refer to the list. And that, guys, is pretty much it. Drop me a comment with your example sentences and give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it and found it useful. Seriously consider subscribing if you want to learn more about punctuation and take your English to the next level.